The what's this really about conversation? The beginning of conversations are often awkward and fraught. We need to make decision after decision at rapid speed. What tone is appropriate? Is it okay to interrupt? Should I tell a joke? What does this person think of me? And there are lots of opportunities to miss something or fail to notice what goes unsaid. This is when the what's this really about conversation can begin. What's this really about has two goals. The first is to determine what topic we want to discuss, what everyone needs from this dialogue. The second is to figure out how this discussion will unfold, what unspoken rules and norms we have agreed upon, and how we will make decisions together. What's this really about often occurs at the start of a conversation, but it can also emerge mid discussion, particularly when we are focused on making choices, considering plans, or thinking practically about costs and benefits. As the next chapter explores, within every conversation, there is a quiet negotiation where the prize is not winning but rather determining what everyone wants so that something meaningful can occur. If the what's this really about conversation doesn't happen, what follows can feel frustrating and directionless. You have probably walked away from discussions feeling this way yourself. We kept talking about completely different things, or all we did was monologue at each other. The solution is learning to recognize what a what's this really about conversation has begun, and then knowing how to negotiate over how it will unfold. Every conversation is a negotiation. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, the court bailiff says to the 12 people around the table. He points to a stack of papers. These are the instructions that the judge read to you. He points to another stack. These are the verdict forms. The room contains 7 men and 5 women with little in common except that they all live in Wisconsin and have appeared at this courthouse as ordered on a cold November morning in 1985. Now they are a jury charged with deciding the fate of a man named Leroy Reed. Over the previous 2 days, they had learned all about Reed, a 42-year-old ex convict. He had been released from the state penitentiary 9 years earlier, and since then had lived a quiet life in a rundown part of Milwaukee. There had been no arrests or missed parole meetings, no fights or complaints from neighbors. By all accounts, he was a model citizen until, that is, he was arrested for possession of a firearm. Because Reed was a felon, it was illegal for him to own a gun. As the trial started, Reed's lawyer had acknowledged that the evidence against his client was compelling. First thing, I will tell you right now, he told the jurors. Leroy Reed is a convicted felon, and on December 7th of last year, 11 months ago, he bought a gun. I will tell you that right off the top, there's gonna be no dispute about that. Under Wisconsin's statute 941.29, that meant Reed should go to prison for up to 10 years, but he ought to be acquitted anyway. The lawyer continued, because Reed had serious mental disabilities that, when combined with the strange circumstances of his arrest, suggested he hadn't intended to commit a crime. A psychologist testified that Reed could read only at a second grade level, and his intelligence was substantially sub average. When, over a decade earlier, He had been convicted for unknowingly serving as the gateway driver for a friend who robbed a convenience store. He was released early, in part because authorities suspected that even after his conviction, Reed hadn't understood that a crime had occurred. Now, at this trial, the jurors were learning about the odd events leading up to Reed's latest arrest. Reed had been trying to get a steady job for years when one day he saw an advertisement in a magazine for a private detective correspondence course. He mailed in the required $20 and in return received a fat envelope containing a tin badge and instructions telling him to, among other things, exercise regularly and buy a pistol. Reed followed the directions scrupulously. He jogged most mornings and about a week after receiving the envelope, took the bus to a sporting goods store and filled out the appropriate paperwork and then walked out with a .22 caliber gun. Afterwards, he went home and put the weapon, still in its box, in his closet. As far as anyone could tell, he never touched it again. The purchase of the gun would likely have gone unnoticed, except that one day he was hanging around the courthouse, hoping someone might hire him to solve a crime, when a police officer asked for identification. Reed handed over the only item in his packet bearing his name, the bill of sale from the sporting goods store. "Are you carrying this weapon?" the officer asked. "It's at home," Reed replied. The cop told Reed to bring the gun, in its box, to the sheriff's station. When Reed arrived, an officer ran his name against a database of felons and promptly arrested him. Now, he was on trial to determine if he would go back to prison. The prosecutor offered a simple argument for conviction. No matter Reed's mental limitations, ignorance of the law is not a defense, he said. The jury might wish the law were different, but Reed had effectively admitted his guilt. He should go to jail. The judge seemed to agree. He told the jury, before sending them off to deliberate, that statute 941.29 dictation. There were three questions they needed to answer. Was Reed a felon? Had he acquired a gun? Did he know he had acquired a gun? If the answer to all three was yes, then Reed was guilty. The jury's duty, the judge told them, was to not be swayed by sympathy, prejudice, or passion. You are to decide only whether the defendant is guilty or not guilty of the offense. If mercy was required, the judge could apply it later during sentencing. Now, however, sitting inside the deliberation room, the jurors seem uncertain how to begin. "Let's choose a four-person," one says. "You are it," another juror replied. "No one will be allowed to leave the room except for the short bathroom breaks until they have a unanimous verdict. If the deliberations go late, they will start again early the next morning. No one will be permitted to withdraw from the conversation or remain silent or defer debate simply because they are tired of talking. They will have to argue over facts and theories, try to persuade and cajole one another until everyone agrees. But first, they need to figure out how to start the conversation. They need to negotiate the unspoken rules for how they will speak and listen and determine what everyone wants and needs. This is a negotiation we all participate in whenever a conversation begins, whether we realize it or not, and it's more complicated than we think." How do we decide what they talk about? Try to recall your last meaningful conversation. Perhaps you and a loved one were discussing how to divvy up household course chores, or maybe it was a work meeting about next year's budget. Possibly you were debating with friends about who should be the next president, or gossiping about whether your neighbors Pablo and Zad are going to break up. As the conversation started, how did you know what everyone wanted to discuss? Did someone announce a topic? We need to decide who's driving Amy to school tomorrow. Or did a focus emerge gradually? Hey, just wondering, did Pablo seem distracted at dinner last night? Once you figured out what to talk about, how did you intuit the conversation's tone? How did you know if you should speak casually, if making jokes was appropriate, if it was okay to interrupt? You probably didn't think about those questions, and yet they all got answered somehow. When researchers have studied conversations, they have found a delicate, almost subconscious dance that usually occurs at a discussion start. This back and forth emerges via our tone of voice, how we hold our bodies, our asides and sighs and laughs. But until we arrive at a consensus on how a dialogue ought to proceed, the real conversations can't begin. Occasionally, a conversation's aim or started explicitly. We are here to discuss the squatter's projections until we realize, midway through, that people's real preoccupations lie elsewhere. What we are actually worried about is whether there are going to be layoffs. Sometimes we cycle through various starts. Someone tells a joke, someone else gets overly formal. There is an awkward silence until a third person takes the lead. And eventually, the conversation's focus is tacitly agreed upon. Some researchers call this process a quiet negotiation, a subtle give and take over which topic we will drive into and which we will skirt around. The rules for how we will speak and listen. The first goal of this negotiation is determining what everyone wants from a conversation. These desires are often revealed by a series of offers and counteroffers, invitations and refusals. There are nearly subconscious but expose if people are willing to play along. This back and forth can take just a few moments or last as long as the conversation itself, and it serves a crucial purpose to help us find a set of subjects that we are all willing to embrace. The second goal in this negotiation is to figure out the rules for how we will speak, listen, and make decisions together. We don't always explicitly state these rules aloud. Rather, we conduct experiments to see which norms will stick. We introduce new topics, send signals via our tone of voice and expressions, react to what people say, project various modes, and pay attention to how others respond. However, regardless of how this quiet negotiation unfolds, the goals are the same. First, to decide what we all need from this conversation. Second, to determine how we will speak and make decisions. Or put differently, to figure out what does everyone want and how will we make choices together. The three conversations. What's this really about? How do we feel? What does everyone want? How will we make choices together? Who are we? The what's this really about conversation often emerges when we confront a decision. Sometimes these decisions are about the conversations itself. Is it okay to openly disagree? Or should we sugarcoat our differences? Is this a friendly chat or a serious talk? Other decisions asks us ask us to think practically. Should we submit an offer for the house or make a judgment? What do you think of Zoe's work? Or analyze a choice. Do you want me to pick up the groceries or get the kids? Underneath all those straightforward decisions are other, potentially more serious choices. If we openly disagree, can we remain friends? Can we afford to pay that much for a home? Is it fair for me to pick up the kids when I have so much work to do? Unless we come to a basic agreement about what we are actually discussing and how we should discuss it, it's hard to make progress. But once we know what everyone wants from a conversation and how we will make decisions together, a more meaningful dialogue can emerge. How a surgeon learned to communicate. In 2014, a prominent surgeon at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York City, someone admired for his warmth, kindness, and medical acumen, realized that for years he had been talking to patients all wrong. Dr. Bafer Edai specialized in treating prostate cancer. Every year, hundreds of men sought his advice after receiving the terrifying news that a tumor had been discovered deep inside their groin. And every year, many of those patients, despite Ehedei's best efforts, failed to hear what he was desperately trying to tell them regarding their disease. Treating prostate cancer involves a complicated trade off. The surest course of action is surgery or radiation to prevent the cancer from spreading. But because the prostate gland is located alongside nerves involving in urination and sexual function, some patients after treatment experience incontinence and impotence sometime for the rest of their lives. So, for most people with prostate tumors, doctors advise against surgery or any other form of treatment. Low risk patients instead are counseled to choose active surveillance, blood test every 6 months, and a prostate biopsy every 2 years to see if the tumor is growing. But otherwise, no surgery, radiation, or anything else. Active surveillance carries its own risks, of course. The tumor might metastasize, but prostate cancer usually grows very slowly. In fact, there is a saying among physicians that older patients will usually die of old age before their prostate cancer kills them. Nearly every day, a new patient would enter Yehidai's office, overwhelmed by a recent diagnosis and confront a difficult choice, have surgery and face a potential lifetime of incontinence and sexual dysfunction, or leave it alone and hope. If the cancer grows, the test will catch it in time. Yehidais believed these patients had come to him for practical medical advice, so he followed what to him seemed a logical script. For the vast majority of people, he felt active surveillance was the right decision, and he provided evidence supporting the wisdom of that approach. He typically began by showing patients data indicating that for 97% of men who opt for active surveillance, the risk of the cancer spreading is roughly the same as for those undergoing invasive treatments, and so they are better off with a wait and see approach. He would hand over studies with the important sentences highlighted in yellow explaining that the risks of waiting were minuscule, while the downsides of surgery were potentially life changing. Yehidais tends to speak in full paragraphs like a medical textbook came to life, but he kept these conversations short and sweet. The right choice was active surveillance. I thought these would be some of the easiest discussions of my life, he told me. I figured they would be overjoyed to hear they could avoid surgery. However, again and again, his patients failed to hear what he was saying. Yedi was talking about treatment options, but running through patients' mind were questions of a very different sort. How will my family react to this news? Am I willing to risk dying so I can continue enjoying my life? Am I ready to confront my mortality? As a result, the patients, instead of looking at the chart and studies and feeling relief, would inevitably begin asking questions. What about the 3% of patients who hadn't benefited from active surveillance? Had they died? Were their deaths painful? We would spend the entire meeting talking about the 3%, said Edai. And then, when we would meet again, the 3% was all they would remember. And they would say they wanted the surgery. It was bewildering. Yehidei had spent his life perfecting his knowledge of prostate tumors. These patients had sought him out because he was an expert, and yet, no matter how much he told them they didn't need surgery, many of them insisted on going under his knife. Sometimes patients would take the highlighted studies home and start researching online for counter evidence, diving into obscure journals and medical abstracts until they had convinced themselves the data was all contradictory or the doctor didn't know what they were talking about. Then they would come back suspicious. Eddie said they would ask, "Are you the active surveillance guy? Is that why you are suggesting this?" Other patients would simply ignore his advice. They would say, "I have a friend who had prostate cancer and he told me the surgery was fine." Or, "I have a neighbor who had brain cancer and she died in 2 months. So it's too risky to wait." This problem wasn't limited to hair dye. Surveys indicate that even today, an estimate 40% of prostate cancer patients opt for unnecessary surgeries. That's more than 50,000 people each year who fail to hear or decide to ignore the advice their physicians are giving them. When it happens again and again, you start to realize this isn't a problem with my patients. Yehidai told me this is a problem with me. I'm doing something wrong. I'm failing at this conversation. Yehidai started asking friends for advice, and eventually a colleague recommended he speak with a professor from Harvard Business School named Deepak Malhotra. Yehidai sent a long email asking if they could talk. Malhotra was part of a group of professors studying how negotiations occur in the real world. In 2016, one of his colleagues had helped the president of Colombia negotiate a peace deal to end a 52-year civil war that had killed more than 200,000 people. After the 2004 National Hockey League lockout, which cancelled half the season, Malhotra analyzed why discussions between players and team owners had broken down and what it took to get them back on track. When he received Ehedai's email, Malhotra was intrigued. His scholarship sometimes describes formal negotiations where, say, union leaders and managers battle around a conference table. But Ehedai's situation was different. The doctor and his patients were engaged in high stake negotiations. Only most of the time, No one recognized they were negotiating with each other. How to figure out what this is really about? First, recognize that this is a negotiation. Malhotra flew to Sloan Kettering to gather more information, and as he shadowed Ehedai, saw opportunities where these conversations could improve. An important step in any negotiation is getting clarity of what all the participants want, Malhotra told me. Often, what people desire from a negotiation isn't obvious at first. Sometimes, a union leader might say her goal is higher wages, but then over time, others, other goals are revealed. She also wants to look good to her members, or one union faction hopes to take power from another faction, or the workers value autonomy on a par with higher packages, but they don't know how to express that at the bargaining table. It can take time and the right inquiries to help define people's desire. So, an important task in any negotiation is asking lots of questions. But as Yehedai interacted with patients, he wasn't asking the most important question. He wasn't asking patients what mattered to them. He wasn't asking, did they want to extend their lives if the treatment robbed them of things like travel and sex? Would you want an extra 5 years of life if the trade off was constant pain? How much of someone's decision depended on their own desire versus what their family wanted? Was the patient secretly hoping the doctor would just tell him what to do? Yehde's biggest mistake was assuming at the start of the conversation that he knew what the patient wanted. Objective medical advice, an overview of options to make an informed choice. But you don't want to begin a negotiation assuming you know what the other side wants, Malhotra said. This is the first part of the what's this really about conversation. Figuring out what everyone wants to talk about. The simplest method for uncovering everyone's desire, of course, is simply asking, what do you want? But that approach can fail if people don't know, or are embarrassed to say, or aren't certain how to express their desires, or worry that revealing too much will put them at a disadvantage. How to figure out what this is really about? First, recognize that this is a negotiation. Next, determine what does everyone want. So, Malhotra suggested that Ehedai take a different approach. Instead of starting the conversation by presenting patients with an overview of options, he should ask one open-ended questions designed to get them talking about their values and what they wanted out of life. What does this cancer diagnosis mean to you? Yehedei asked a 62-year-old patient a week later. Well, the man said, it makes me think of my dad because he died when I was young, which was tough on my mom. I would hate to put my family through that. The man talked about his kids and how he didn't want to traumatize them. He spoke about his worries regarding the world his grandchildren were inheriting. What with climate change and all. Yehedai had expected the man to talk about his medical concerns or his mortality or to ask questions about pain. Instead, his preoccupations were focused on his family. What he really wanted to know was which treatment would make his wife and kids worry least. He didn't care about data. He wanted to discuss how to avoid upsetting the people he loved. A similar pattern emerged in other conversations. Yehedai would start with a broad questions. What did your wife say when you told her about your diagnosis? And instead of talking about their disease, Patients spoke about their marriages, or memories of a parent's illness, or about non medical traumas such as divorce or bankruptcies. Some spoke about the future, how they hoped to spend their retirements, what they wanted to leave behind as a legacy. They started working out how to fit the idea of cancer into their lives, debating over what this disease means. That's how a quiet negotiation works. It is a process of people deciding together what topic we will discuss and how we will discuss them. It is an attempt to figure out what we all want from a conversation, even if we are not ourselves sure at first. Some patients, Yehudai's questions revealed, were scared and wanted emotional reassurance. Others wanted to feel in control. Some seeking social proof they weren't taking unusual risks, needed to hear how other people had made this decision. Still, others wanted the most cutting edge treatments. Often, Yehudai only managed to figure out what a patient wanted to talk about by asking them the same basic questions again and again in different ways. Eventually, they would say something that revealed what was important to them, he told me. This explained why Ehedai had failed to communicate with so many patients over the years. He hadn't been asking the right questions. He hadn't been asking about their needs and desires, what they wanted from this conversation. He had assumed he already knew. And because he hadn't bothered to figure out what mattered, he had deluged patients with information they didn't care about. He resolved to change how he communicated, to stop lecturing and start asking better questions to begin having proper dialogues. Within 6 months of Yehudai's adopting this more inclusive approach, the number of his patients opting for surgery fell by 30%. Today, he is training other surgeons to negotiate about topics such as opioid use, treatment for breast cancer, and end of life decisions. It's an approach we can all use, even in less dire discussions. When we are talking to a friend about, say, their dating life, or a work colleague about an upcoming project, or our partner about how we should raise our kids. In many conversations, there is a surface topic, but also a deeper, more meaningful subject that, when we bring it into the light, reveals what everyone wants most from the conversation. It's important to ask what they want. Yehudai told me it's an invitation for people to tell you who they are. The super communicator in the jury room. I know some juries like to take a vote right off the bat. The freshly appointed foreperson tells his fellow jurors, but maybe, he suggests, they could avoid committing to positions right away and instead go around the room and offer their general impressions of the trial. His goal is obviously to sidestep knee jerk reactions, but some jurors can't help immediately taking a side. 1. A firefighter named Carl says there is no question in his mind that Leroy Reed is guilty. To me, they proved it beyond a reasonable doubt, he says. The extenuating circumstances, as far as what his intent was, his awareness of the law, his ability to read and understand, is not for us to determine. As far as guilt or innocence, that's for the judge to take into consideration in the sentencing. He reminds everyone of the three questions the judge instructed them to answer. Was Reed a felon? Had he acquired a gun? Did he know he had acquired a gun? As far as I am concerned, they met the 3 points. The burden of proof, Carl says. Two other jury quickly agree with Carl. Leroy Reed is guilty. Others, though, are less certain. I feel that the defendant is guilty on all three accusations technically. But I guess I feel that we should also take into consideration the fact that he does have a reading disability, says a public school teacher named Lorraine. Another juror, Henry, is also unsure. Technically, the man is guilty. Guilty has sin, he says. But I want to acquit Leroy because I don't think he was fully aware of the rules. After everyone in the room speaks, it appears there are three people certain they want to convict Reed, two who are strongly leaning towards acquittal, and seven on the fence. We have a very philosophical argument on our hands, says one of the undecided, a psychologist named Barbara. Are we obligated as a jury to follow the letter of the law and find him guilty? Or are we obligated as a jury to use our special level of conscience? If, at this point, an educated observer were asked to guess how this would turn out, the answer would be easy. Leroy Reed is going to prison. Numerous studies have found that juries, regardless of initial uncertainties, usually eventually vote to convict, particularly if the defendant has a criminal record. However, there is something different about this jury. It's imperceptible at first, but it slowly becomes apparent when a juror in his mid 30s, a man named John Bowley, starts talking. Bowley seems to understand that all the jurors are involved in a negotiation with one another. He also recognizes that the first step in this negotiation is figuring out what everyone wants from this conversation. I'm really not at all sure what I think or what I feel on this case. Bolly tells the others when it's his turn to speak. There is no question but that this man is a felon, and there is no question but that he purchased a firearm. His tone is a bit formal. This guy's reading magazines and living in a fantasy world, Bolly says. I'm not sure, he starts. I want to listen to other people and I want to talk about and figure this out together as we go along. The other jurors seemed a bit mystified by Bolly. Some of them are dressed in jeans while he is in a suit. Some have indicated they are retired or work in factories or are staying at home parents. Bolly is a professor of contemporary literature at Marquette University, where his specialty is Derrida. As one juror later told me, when he started going on about Kafka and trials at one point, I was like, what are you talking about, man? What planet are you from? However, Bolly is different in another, less obvious way. He is a super communicator. He knows he must figure out what each juror wants from this discussion, what they need, and he knows that requires, as a first step, asking lots of questions. So he starts posing them as the conversation moves around the room. What do you think of handguns? What did you think when Leroy got flummoxed? Do you own a gun? Can we talk about what possession means? What is justice? To the other jurors, these questions seemed innocent, almost like casual asides. But Bolly is listening closely to how people answer, cataloging each juror in his mind, trying to figure out what each person wants to discuss. Some want to talk about morality and fairness. I don't care what the law says. Has justice been done? Or autonomy. I am not a computer. I want to sit here and talk about it and think about it and not just say right off the bat. He is convicted on these three counts. He is therefore guilty. Or are simply bored. We can argue about semantics and we could do that forever. As Bolly listens, he keeps a list in his head of what each person is seeking. Henry wants guidance. Barbara wants compassion. Carl wants to go by the book. He is engaging in the first part of the "What's this really about" conversation, figuring out what everyone wants. But there is also a second part to "What's this really about?" determining how we will talk to one another and cooperate in making decisions. There are lots of decisions that occur during every conversation, ranging from the unimportant "will we interrupt each other?" to the crucial "should we send this man to jail?" So, amid our negotiation, we must also figure out how we will make choices together. How to figure out what this is really about? First, recognize that this is a negotiation. Next, determine what does everyone want? Then, how will we make choices together? A negotiator's goal is expanding the pie. Our understanding of this second part of the "What's this really about" discussion, how will we make choices together, has been transformed in the past 40 years. In 1979, a famous group of professors, Roger Fisher, William Urey, and Bruce Patton, founded the Harvard Negotiation Project. Their management, which up to that point had received relatively scant scholarly attention, 2 years later they published a book based on their research, Getting to Yes, that turned popular understanding of negotiations upside down. Until then, many people had assumed that negotiations were zero sum games. Anytime I gained something at the bargaining table, you lost. A generation ago reads "Getting to Yes" in contemplating a negotiation. The common question in people's mind was who is going to win and who is going to lose. But Fisher, a Harvard law professor, thought that approach was all wrong. As a young man, he had helped implementing the Marshall Plan in Europe and later aided in finding ways to end the Vietnam War. He had worked on the Camp David Accords in 1978 and in securing the release of 52 American hostages from Iran in 1981. In those and other negotiations, Fisher saw something different at work. The best negotiators didn't battle over who should get the biggest slice of pie. Rather, they focused on making the pie itself larger, finding win-win solution where everyone walked away happier than before. The concept that both sides could win in a negotiation, Fisher and his colleagues wrote, might seem impossible, but it is increasingly recognized that there are cooperative ways of negotiating our differences and that even if a win-win solution cannot be formed, a wise agreement can still often be reached that is better for both sides. Since Getting to Yes was first published, hundreds of studies have found ample evidence to support this idea. Elite diplomats have explained that their goals at the bargaining table isn't seizing victory, but rather convincing the other side to become collaborators in uncovering new solutions that no one thought of before. Negotiation, among its top practitioners isn't a battle, it's an act of creativity. This approach has become known as interest based bargaining, and its first step looks a lot like what Bolly did in the jury room or what Dr. Ehedai did with his patients at Sloan Catering. Ask open ended questions and listen closely. Get people talking about how they see the world and what they value most. Even if you don't learn right away what others are seeking, they might not know themselves. You will at least inspire them to listen back. If you want the other side to appreciate your interests, Fisher wrote, begin by demonstrating that you appreciate theirs. Listening, though, is just the first step. The next task is addressing the second question inherent in a what's this really about conversation. How will we make decisions together? What are the rules for this dialogue? Frequently, the best way to figure out those rules is by testing out various conversational approaches and seeing how others react. For instance, negotiators often conduct experiments. First, I will interrupt you. And then I will be polite. And then I will bring you a new topic or make an unexpected concession. And watch what you do until everyone decides together which norms are accepted and how this conversation should unfold. These experiments can take the form of a proposal or solutions or unanticipated suggestions or new topic that are suddenly introduced. In each case, the goal is the same to see if this probe reveals a path forward. Great negotiators are artists, said Mikkel Gelfand, a professor at Stanford's Business School. They take conversations in unexpected directions. Among the surest methods for sparking this kind of experimentations is introducing new themes and questions to a discussion, adding items to the table until the conversation has changed enough that new possibilities are revealed. If you are negotiating over salaries, for instance, and you are stuck, Gelfand said, then drag something new in. We have been focused on wages, but what if instead of increasing paychecks, we give everyone more sick days? What if we let them work from home? The challenge is not to eliminate conflict, Fishers wrote in Getting to Yes, but to transform it. All of us conduct these kind of experiments in our everyday conversation, frequently without realizing it. When we make a joke or ask a probing question or suddenly get serious or silly, we are in a sense conducting a test to see if our companions will accept our invitation, if they will play along. Like interest based bargaining. The what's this really about conversation succeeds by transforming a conversation from a tussle over where the dialogue is going into a collaboration, a group experiment where the aim is figuring out what everyone is seeking and the goal and values we all share. To an outside observer, it might seem as if we are simply discussing who will pick up the kids and the groceries. But we, the people participating in this quiet negotiation, are aware of subtexts and undercurrents. The experiment's underway. We are asking open minded questions. Am I doing enough to help? And adding items to the table. What if I do grocery pickups and wash the dishes, and you get the kids and fold the laundry? Until the conversation has changed enough to make clear what everyone actually wants and the rules we have all agreed on. I want to respect your time, and work is important. So, what if I get takeout and ask Uncle Arvind to get the kids so we can both come home late? The words this really about conversation is a negotiation. Only the goal is not to win, but to help everyone agree on the topic we will discuss and how we will make decisions together. Back in the jury room, Bolly had done the first part of what's this really about. He has asked questions and sought to understand what each of his fellow jury want. Some of what Bolly hears indicates a guilty verdict in becoming increasingly likely. The foreperson says that he intended to convict, and then another jury, who was previously on the fence, agrees with him. Call. The fireman jumps in with support. Leroy Reed didn't hurt anyone this time, he says. But what about next time? That's why the law is there. Why felons cannot own guns? Call says. Others chime their assent. What if Mr. Reed would have bought a gun and killed some innocent bystander? Somewhere along the line, these studies of courtroom dynamics indicate is when a jury's verdict often start to gel. This is the moment when one or two juries take a strong stance and others, because of indecisiveness or pliability, climb aboard the bandwagon, that a guilty verdict becomes inevitable. But Barbara, the school psychologist, isn't quite ready. I wonder if we could find some room, she says, that perhaps he didn't, in the full sense of the word, know he was a felon, and didn't, in the full sense of the word, know that he possessed a firearm. The only thing that bothers me, the foreperson shoots back, is that the judge said something to the effect that ignorance is no excuse. The conversation is getting heated, voices are rising. It's at this point that Bolly speaks again, but in a different way from before. He's done asking questions. It's time for the second part of what's this really about conversation. Figuring out how everyone will make choices together. He begins by introducing something new to the conversation and imagining what it's like to be Leroy Reed. One of the things I noticed, Bolly says, interrupting the growing tension with a light tone, is something about Reed's gun. If you look closely at it, he says, it looks like a toy. This comment comes out of left field. The others look at Bolly with confusion. Now, I would be willing to bet. If I bought a gun, Bolly continues, and I got a holster with it, the first thing I would wanna do is stick it here. He gestures at his belt and go around Milwaukee. And every time I walk past that bridge or under that underpass or something like that, I don't have to worry about what's gonna step out from behind a lamppost. I am 10 feet tall. I am packing a rod. His fellow juror or befuddled. What's going on? What is packing a rod? The only thing everyone knows for certain is that Bolly should never be given a weapon. But Bolly isn't really talking about guns. He's talking about something bigger. He's conducting an experiment. Now, Bolly continues. The fact that he handled it almost like it was this sacramental thing, and he locks it up and he puts it in his closet and he shuts the door. That's an important detail, he tells them. He doesn't put it in the holster or in his pocket or wear it on his hip or anything like that. One of the other jurors, someone who until now seemed willing to ride the momentum to a guilty verdict, picks up the thread. Right, he says. He didn't take it out of the box. Another juror jumps in. We can't even say that he knew how to use a gun. This is pure conjecture. No evidence was offered during the trial suggesting that Leroy Reed is ignorant of how to use a firearm. but the jurors are now building a story in their mind. Maybe he doesn't know how to load a gun. Maybe he doesn't even realize that a gun needs bullets. Within a few minutes, a whole new version of Leroy Reed has materialized. Someone who, even if he possessed a gun, might not have understood he possessed it. In which case, the judge's third question, did he know he had acquired a gun, has taken on a new dimension. Boli has shifted the conversation. He had reframed this discussion by experiment with an idea, by inviting the jurors to start imagining new possibilities, dreaming up different ways to analyze the questions at hand. They are negotiating over how they will come to a decision together. The momentum towards a guilty verdict has slowed, but they are still a long way from an unanimous choice.